there, and welcome. Well, we've come to another Anomaly day. Today's is very unusual indeed, and I'm going to start a little far afield from the story itself. When I was studying psychology, one of the things that I studied was motivation and learning. And in that study, we studied animal learning as well as human learning. And there is a story of an 18th century horse that knew arithmetic. Now, the ups and downs of it, the ins and outs of the story was that the man who owned the horse believed the horse could really do arithmetic. But the horse only got the right answer when the man knew the right answer. So how could the man have taught the animal arithmetic without, knowing he taught him? And how could the man cheat without knowing he was cheating? Well, it has to do with how closely the horse observed the man. Whenever he got near the number that was the right number, he would be pawing the earth. And whenever he got near the number that was the right number, his owner's pupils would dilate because he was right there at the answer. And the horse would see it and stop. And he would be rewarded because he got the right answer. Now think of that. Think of the fact that the owner didn't realize that he was being observed by the horse in that way. The owner was convinced his particular horse was the genius of all horses and he could do arithmetic. And the horse was simply so completely tuned in to his owner that he seemed to be doing it. That brings me to the too charming Anomaly. When I was teaching college freshmen, I often had situations where I would have to bring in a college student and conference with them about their work. Now, most of the time this was fairly run-of-the-mill, and most of my college students were pretty dedicated students, so there wasn't a lot of motivation involved. But I had one student that had a terrible habit of writing run-on sentences. It struck me as odd because I'd mark them and he wouldn't get them correct when he did his revisions. So I brought him in. Now this young man was a thoroughly delightful young man. He was beloved by everybody around him. People all through the school liked him. He was popular. And I think all of his teachers must have liked him too. We sat down and talked for a brief time, and then we started working on his essay. And I suddenly became very aware of the fact that he was watching me in a minutely close way. Not in an obvious way, not staring with the crazy eyes, not doing that. He was sitting next to me, and he had his eyes trained on me when we were working on his paper. And I don't think most people would have noticed it. I think most people working with him would have been paying attention to the writing and assuming he was too. But he wasn't. He was attuned entirely to me. And that's when I realized he was getting cues from me about where sentences ended. Now, he wasn't a particularly dedicated reader, but he was a good speaker, so his mind was perfectly fine. But somewhere in his history as a student, he never really learned how to shape sentences. So ever since then, he'd been depending on his tremendous charm to convince teachers to see their way clear to help him on papers, and if not teachers, then fellow students. Now, I wasn't sure of my conjecture, not right away, so I decided to do something. I decided to have him write on the board sentences for me, and I would sit behind him where he couldn't see me. He started doing it, and it was immediately apparent that without the visual cue from me, he didn't know where sentences were supposed to stop. And that's when I called him on it. I said, "You don't know how to make sentences, do you? You don't know where the periods go, do you?" And he said, "You're making me feel like I'm stupid or something." And that's when I knew. If somebody ever clued into that he was faking this knowledge, he immediately got defensive, and his sweet demeanor got prickly because he was embarrassed. And of course, if you were a teacher that liked him and thought he was a wonderful young man, for indeed he was, you would feel suddenly embarrassed about making him feel embarrassed. I wasn't embarrassed. I said, "Far from it. I think you are sort of ingenious because you found a way to hide your weakness and depend on others to fill in for that weakness. And if you had the right girlfriend, you'd be in fine shape. But right now, it seems you're without the right girlfriend." Or, I didn't really inquire, he might have needed a boyfriend. Who knows? That's not the point. The point is, he had a great and charismatic social intelligence that made him particularly observant of people he knew were knowledgeable, so that he could use their little cues, their little physical hints, the little breaths, stops, gestures that indicated to him, oh, this is where it goes, and this is where it goes, and this is where it goes. I don't think he knew fully what he was doing. I think he was onto himself just a little bit. And certainly, no regular human would pay attention to that. But you know what? I'm not a regular human, it turns out. It turns out I'm pretty much animal. And when he started using the trick of the brilliant horse on me, I thought, uh-oh, we need to confront this. I tried to help him as best I could through the semester, and I think I did. But he was still not fully adept as he should have been. Sorry about that, I dropped something. He wasn't as adept as he should have been, but he did improve. And he could, if he tried, learn to be better. I hope I got him to the point that he could survive his next classes. He had plenty of ideas, and he had the vocabulary to put them down. His one hole, the one little tattered hole in the tapestry of his knowledge was in the punctuation. Imagine that. Imagine to be that kind of hamstrung. I'm sure he felt like there was no way he could figure it out, but I think he did. I don't remember whether he passed my class or not, to be honest with you. I should, shouldn't I? But I don't. I do remember him confessing to me that yes, he wasn't sure where the end punctuation went. Imagine being that clever. And that is the problem with human beings sometimes. Sometimes we're so clever we get in our own way. Sometimes we're so clever we think ourselves out of good ideas rather than into them. There was no way that boy was going to lose in the end. I'm convinced of it. And do you know why? He was too charming. He was delightful. He was the kind of person that the world does love. And I suspect he did eventually learn how to write the end stops. You know, in a way, for many students, when they graduated, I sort of died to them. It was like I passed into the great beyond. And that was fine. That's fine with me. I actually don't have a problem with that. I think there's something very genuine about that. Me being necessarily only for a brief time. But every once in a while, with a student like that, I do wish that I could ferret out in the great universe where he went and how he's doing. That's it for today. I hope you have a lovely rest of the day. And I hope you see me again, you gorgeous people.